The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Region 12 San Antonio Flood Planning Group meeting. My name is Morgan White, and I'm the team lead for Regional Flood Planning. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the phone, you can select the phone call option under the audio pane drop-down, and the dial-in information will be displayed. Please enter any technical questions you have, audio or other access issues you have into the questions box. If you know of anyone who is having difficulty joining the webinar, they can call in. I will soon enter the phone-in information for the public into the chat box. Please note that this phone-in number will be for listening purposes only. Additionally, please do not type substantive questions for the members or presenters into the questions box. The public will have the opportunity to provide comments and ask questions during the designated public comment periods, as noted on the meeting agenda. Individuals who have registered using the online public comment registration form will be called upon and unmuted to provide their comments at the appropriate time. If you have not filled out the public comment registration form, but are a member of the public wishing to provide oral comments, you can either fill the form out now, and we will paste a link into the chat box, or you can raise your hand using the raise your hand button seen on this slide in the upper left-hand corner during the designated public comment period. And please note that public comments will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Next slide, please. Hello, everyone. I am James Bronikowski. I'm the manager of the Regional Flood Planning Department here at the Texas Water Development Board. Thank you for joining the Region 12 San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting. Our first item of business today is to call the meeting to order. And before doing that, I wanted to go ahead and do an attendance roll call of all the voting members present. So starting with that, I'll go down the list of names for voting members. Please answer yes, present, or something else in the affirmative when I call your name. Doris Cooksey.
Here.
And I apologize if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Please correct me. David Wegman.
Present.
Thank you. Deborah Reed.
Here.
Nefi Garza.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Thank you. Kara Tackett.
Present.
Thank you. Jeffrey Carroll.
Here.
John Paul Beasley.
Good afternoon, present.
Thank you. Suzanne Scott.
Present.
Steve Gonzalez.
Present.
David Mock.
Present.
And Steve Cluse. Mr. Steve Cluse.
Klaus.
All right, so we'll mark him as absent for today. Thank you, everyone. With 10 members present, we do have a quorum, so we can begin the meeting. Next slide, please. Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is James Bronikowski. I'd like to welcome you all to this inaugural Region 12 San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting. We do have a full agenda today and quite a bit to accomplish and to discuss. agenda is mostly organizational, and we have several administrative tasks for the group that we'd like you to discuss. So without further ado, I'll pass this on to Director Brooke Paulp of the Texas Water Development Board for a welcome introduction.
Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It's always hit or miss with the pop home technology, as I'm sure you all are encountering yourself in this weird new period of telecommuting. I just wanted to pop in and thank each and every one of you for volunteering for this, huge mission that we have been given by the legislature and SB 7 and SB 8 to come up with the first state flood plan. It is a huge task, and we are asking a lot of our regional flood groups as well. It's going to be a long road, and we're going to learn a lot about flood mitigation and what works and what doesn't work, and what each of your regions needs to fully tackle this, very pressing issue of flood. And we have an amazing team at TWDB that is here to help. James is leading the meeting today, but we have, Reem and an amazing team. So if there's anything you need, please call them. And if there's anything that I can do to help expedite this process or make it easier on each and every one of you, please let me know. Pick up the phone and call me directly, and I'm more than happy to talk. Flood is an intensely personal issue for me. I had a friend who lost everything in the Onion Creek floods. Then I had another friend who lost 3 family members in the Wimberley floods. So getting this done correctly, with all seriousness, is, very, very important to me. With that being said, I'm going to pass it back to James, and just tons of gratitude for y'all volunteering to serve. I know you have real jobs and families, and everyone's dealing with this COVID in their own way. So thank you so much, y'all. And happy Monday.
Thank you, Director Paulp.
Thanks,
Glad you
James.
could join us today. Next slide, please. So here we have a summary of the agenda for today's first meeting. First off, we'll have a call to order, which is what we just went through now. Next up, we'll have a welcome and meeting facilitation information and instructions, followed by member introductions. And then we'll also have a presentation by the Water Development Board on the regional flood planning process overview. After that, we'll get into the main items for today's agenda for the group to consider and discuss. And those 3 are a discussion of the group bylaws and the possible consideration of adopting the group bylaws, consideration of nominating and electing a regional flood planning group chair or interim chair, and also consider selecting a planning group sponsor to act on behalf of the regional flood planning group. Next slide, please. Also on the agenda today for the group to consider is additional regional specific public notice requirements, if any, that might be necessary to ensure adequate public notice in the region. Consideration of authorizing the regional flood planning group sponsor, if selected, to apply for grant funds and enter into a contract with the Water Development Board. Discussion of any necessary additional voting and non-voting positions that may be needed to ensure adequate representation from the interest in the region. Consider initiating regional flood planning group solicitation process for individuals to fill required voting member positions not designated by the Texas Water Development Board. We also have a spot for, spot for receiving general public comments. And we will also consider the date and agenda items for the next meeting. Next slide, please. Again, thank you and welcome everyone. I shall preside over this first meeting and run it until the groups has adopted bylaws and elected an interim chair or chair. I shall follow Robert's Rules of Orders as best as I can. If anyone has any questions or is free, has any discussion topic, feel free to let me know and I'll recognize you and you can speak at that point. Next slide, please. The next item on the agenda is member introductions. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. will go through the list of initial voting members. As I call upon you, please state your name, the interest category or state agency that you represent, your occupation, and one sentence that, or sentence or two that tell us all what brought you here today and why you want to be a part of the regional flood planning group process. Ms. Doris Cooksey.
I represent electric generating utility category. I guess my title is Senior Manager, Water Quality and Planning, and that's in the environmental group department in our company at CPS Energy. And I guess I work on water planning, water supply planning, lake and dam management, and utility line construction projects, electric and gas.
Thank you, Ms. Cooksey. David Wegman, sorry.
Hey, good afternoon. David Wegman with Bear County Public Works. I represent the Region 12 counties. I'm Engineering Services Manager for Bear County Public Works. In that capacity, we handle flood control, regional flood control initiatives. We have a close working relationship with the City of San Antonio River Authority, and all the suburban cities within Bear County. So I think as a group, we're well positioned.
Thank you, Mr. Wegman. Welcome. Deborah Reed.
Yes, I represent environmental. I'm the technical director for the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance and have a specific interest in promoting green infrastructure and flood control or water management, stormwater management by watershed.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Welcome. Nefi Garza.
Good afternoon. My name is Nefi Garza. I currently work for the City of San Antonio as an Assistant Director of Public Works. My role and responsibility there is to oversee all the stormwater and flood control management. I do represent the flood districts, even though we don't have a flood control district in San Antonio. Our MS4 permit for the city does require us to do flood management. So all my career has been in flooding, flood management, and various roles throughout, and just excited to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Garza. Welcome. Kara Tackett.
Hi there, I'm Kara Tackett. I am a Senior Vice President with Pape Dawson Engineers. I represent the industry category. So my day job is I run our Water Resources statewide group for drainage, water, and wastewater projects. I'm a recovering land development engineer and have worked with lots of folks across this spectrum for years. And so as industries, I am past president of Real Estate Council of San Antonio, past president of Professional Engineers in Private Practice. I'm a member of the North Chamber, the San Antonio Chamber, ACEC Engineers. I am the Texas Association of Builders State Water Chair. So I represent a kind of a large spectrum of businesses and development industries in that role, and look forward to being here.
Thank you, Ms. Tackett, and welcome. Jeffrey Carroll.
Afternoon, all. My name is Jeff Carroll, and I'm the Director of Development Services for the City of Boerne. I also oversee the street and drainage departments as well, and I represent the municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll, and welcome. John Paul Beasley.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Beasley. I am currently an environmental engineer and scientist with U.S. Army at Fort Sam Houston. I also am an adjunct professor with Texas A&M School of Law, which I teach environmental compliance law here at the Travis Park Professional Building. I'm about my third year. And then I also am finishing my PhD and some additional research interest at UTSA here in San Antonio. And so I guess what brings me to this place, with the Texas Water Development Board is both my master's and PhD as largely emphasis was hydrological engineering and watershed restoration, but flooding has always been a real emphasis in my research. So it just kind of really pulled me to that way to make a little bit more emphasis in like urban surface runoff and those types of things. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley, and welcome. Suzanne Scott.
Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Scott, and I recently retired as general manager of the San Antonio River Authority. I was with the River Authority for 20 years and 13 years as general manager. And the San Antonio River Authority has been very involved in flood control issues throughout our entire basin. We have a partnership, as was mentioned earlier by Dave Wegman, with the City of San Antonio, the Bexar County, and many of our suburban cities within Bexar County. But we've also worked throughout our district with all of the counties and cities throughout the entire San Antonio River Basin. We have been involved in updating all the flood maps and models for our area, also doing all the flood map updates through Atlas 14, creating watershed master plans for all the watersheds throughout the basin, and also working with our partners to determine how we could address flooding in various damage centers that are identified through the flood mapping and modeling that we've done. We've also been very involved in nature-based flood management through stormwater management and other strategies such as low impact development to have multiple benefit projects. So I'm glad to be here. We've worked very collaboratively with our partners, and I look forward to working with everyone here on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, and welcome. Steve Gonzalez.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Steve Gonzalez. I'm representing the small businesses. I work for Civil Tech Engineering. I am a vice president in their business development, and just excited to be here. I've worked with a number of folks on this call in Bexar County, and I also worked at the San Antonio River Authority with Suzanne and Neffy. So a lot of what Suzanne just mentioned, I was a part of. So excited to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, and welcome. David Mock.
Yeah, hello. I'm representing the water districts. I'm the general manager of the Bandera County River Authority and Groundwater District. One of the reasons I'm really passionate about this is before Harvey, we had the record in 1978 for one of the biggest flash floods in history, at least modern history. We had close to 50 inches of rainfall here in the headwaters. You can imagine what that's like. As a river authority here, we've actually got 2 projects with Texas Water Development Board. One we've already finished. We have a USGS flood early warning system. The first time they had done it in Texas, they brought it down here from the Midwest and basically gave us a predictive model of what areas are going to flood before it happens. And that was also funded by a grant from Texas Water Development Board. That's for the Medina River, which goes into the San Antonio Basin. We also have a current project with USGS to replicate that project, but in the Sabinal River. That is also funded by Texas Water Development Board through a grant and also through some grant money from the Department of Interior. And that one will flow into the, of course, the Nueces Basin. So flash floods are a real problem out here. We're in flash flood alley, and we thought it was very important to be proactive and find ways to predict how to move before the flood event actually happens. I really appreciate you all allowing me to work with you guys. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. Mock, and welcome. And has Steve Klaus joined us? I do not think so. No, he has not. All right, thank you, everyone. At this time, I'd also like to give the opportunity to the non-voting members to introduce themselves. Chris Robles.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Robles. I'm with the Texas General Land Office. I work here with the Community Development and Revitalization team as a community outreach specialist. Our main job is to reach out to local stakeholders and help them after any local disaster such as Hurricane Harvey. Let's see, some of the things that we've done include studies. Right now we have a study going on with the combined river basins. It's going to evaluate mitigation and abatement strategies in an effort to reduce disaster impacts and increase community resiliency. And I look forward to working with everyone.
Thank you. Susan Jablonski. I don't think she was able to join this meeting. Jamie McCool.
Good afternoon. I'm Jamie McCool with the Texas Department of Agriculture. I'm a field representative within the Trade and Business Development Division of TDA, and I cover 23 counties in my region. There are 11 different regions in Texas, and we support and promote Texas agriculture along with the TDA programs under the TDA umbrella. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie Johnson.
Hello, this is Natalie Johnson. I'm a hazard mitigation planner for Texas Division of Emergency Management. So I help local jurisdictions develop FEMA approved hazard mitigation plans for all hazards. And I'm here to observe and learn more about regional planning and be a resource to the team. Thank you.
Thank you. Marty Kelly. Sorry, Mr. Kelly, I believe you're muted. All right, we'll give him one moment to work that out. We'll come back to you, sir. Jared Bowen.
Yeah, I'm Jared Bowen. I'm with the Texas State Stormwater Conservation Board. I'm a flood control specialist, field representative. I cover approximately 54 counties west of I-35 to help with the operation and maintenance of flood control dams in the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Bagans.
Hi, everyone. I am Richard Bagans. I will be your representative from TWDB, helping you guys assist with anything you guys need in producing your guys' first regional flood plan. I come from a few years of background in water planning, and I'm excited to transition over to working with this flood plan now. And thanks, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Kelly, were you able to get your microphone working?
James, this is Morgan. I sent him a message, and I'm working on seeing if he could maybe call in. So, if possible, maybe we could come back to him in a little bit.
Sure. Sure. We can go on with the next item on the agenda here, but we can always come back for him if we can get that worked out. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves and welcome. Next slide, please. Next up on the agenda, we have a presentation on the regional flood planning process overview. And as you can see here, the Texas Water Development Board divided up the state into 15 regional flood planning regions. This was done by the direction of Senate Bill 8 to be divided based on river basins. And as you can see, this is Region 12, San Antonio. Next slide, please. I'm sure many of you already know much of this information, or a lot of information about your region, but I thought I'd go over some basic information on the flood planning region for everyone participating today. The number of full counties, it looks like unfortunately no county is completely engulfed by this region, even though it looks like Bear is the closest. However, it does cover 16 partial counties with an estimated 2020 population of 2.2 million. The land area is approximately 4,400 square miles, and that includes over 4,200 stream miles. Based on National Flood Insurance Program claims data from 1975 to the present, there's been approximately $49 million in claims. And also wanted to note that this region includes approximately 35 miles of Texas shoreline. Next slide, please. As far as the makeup and facilitation of these first meetings, they would consist of go-to webinars run by the Texas Water Development Board. I am facilitating this meeting today. We have a modest, mostly organizational agenda ahead of us, where we'll go over several, few administrative items that we'd like the group to discuss and potentially take action on. We've scheduled a 3-hour meeting window until 4 o'clock. And as I mentioned earlier, I will facilitate this meeting to the best of my ability using Robert's Rule of Order until a chair is selected. At that time, the chair may take over. If they choose not to, we can still help with facilitating this meeting. It'll be up to that person at that time. As I mentioned, there are 3 key decisions that we would like the group to consider and potentially take action on today. And those are, next slide, please. The adoption of regional flood planning group bylaws. Just wanted to note that this does require a 2/3 vote of all members. Also, the election of a chair or interim chair, and the designation of a planning group sponsor political subdivision. Next slide, please. As far as the general responsibilities of the officers, as defined by the model bylaws that we will get to in a little bit, this includes a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, and an executive committee. The chair shall be the presiding executive officer of the Regional Flood Planning Group and will preside at all meetings. The vice chair shall assist the chair in the discharge of his or her duties, and if the chair is unable to carry out such duties, the vice chair shall assume the roles and duties of the chair. The secretary shall maintain the minutes and take attendance of all Regional Flood Planning Group meetings. And as I mentioned, there is also a provision for an executive committee, which shall be composed of 5 Regional Flood Planning Group members, including the chair, vice chair, secretary, and 2 members at large. Next slide, please. Also on the agenda is the potential selection of a planning group sponsor. We've included their responsibilities listed here, and those include applying for grant funding from the Texas Water Development Board on behalf of the Regional Flood Planning Group. And that includes entering into and managing a grant agreement contract with the Water Development Board. The planning group sponsor shall also be responsible for soliciting and managing technical consultants. They will serve as the planning group's administrative agent by organizing meetings, public notices, agendas, meeting presentations, handouts, minutes, and any other necessary documents and presentations. The planning group sponsor will also be responsible for delivering the first regional flood plan no later than January 10th, 2023, which is the date set by statute. Which brings me to the next point here of wanting to give you a good understanding of, for everyone involved here, to give a good understanding of the overall structure and framework that this regional flood planning process will work under. At the very top of that is statute, as dictated and decided by Senate Bill 8. Senate Bill 8 modified several sections of the Texas Water Code to allow for this regional and state flood planning process, and that will be the primary resource as far as determining how this program will be run. After that, the agency went through, after that passage and signage by the governor, the agency went about a rulemaking process. There was considerable public comment and feedback through that process, and through that, our board was able to adopt 31 Texas Administrative Code Chapter 361 and 362 as those relate to regional and state flood planning respectively. These rules will govern kind of another overarching framework that the group will have to follow. It kind of gives more detail, not fully explained in statutes. Underneath that is the grant contract and scope of work. These are under development right now and will be presented to our board of directors which is scheduled to be presented to our board of directors at the November 19th board meeting. And this kind of lays out in even more detail all the tasks involved and responsibilities and requirements that will need to be included in the regional flood plan. And of course, we're also developing guidance documents that will delve even further into detail onto how to accomplish all of these tasks and requirements. Next slide, please. We also wanted to give a presentation or give an explanation on what should all be included in the regional flood plan and all of its required components. For this slide, I was going to ask if Reem June would help describe this one for us.
Sure, thank you, James. Good afternoon. My name is Reem June. I'm the Director of Flood Planning here in the Texas Water Development Board. These are some of the technical components that should be included in the regional flood plan or each regional flood plan. I'm going to go over them briefly. So the first task, as it mentions here, is identify the flood risk. This should include known flood risk, as in the area with existing FEMA flood map or regulatory maps from the local entities. Sometimes the local entities' regulatory maps supersede the FEMA, or almost always the FEMA maps. They should include any areas with knowledge of historic flooding. So this should include stream reaches that doesn't have H&H models or any kind of mapping done at this point. We're also aware of the localized or urban flooding, which a lot of the time is still tend to go unmapped and unregulated and unstudied. So these should include identification of these areas. We realize that the time frame is not long enough to perform all this modeling and identify the flood risk, but the general area should be identified, and also the type of flood risk should be identified and how it was identified. It could be from a public meeting that you all have held and someone came and mentioned, I flooded here in 2015, October of 2015. That region should be identified with the date of the public meeting that was held and how it was identified and what type of flooding happened. So that's that task. It's supposed to include all of the known flood risks. Once that is done, a gap analysis will be performed, which will identify areas of known flood risk or flood-prone areas that does not have current H&H model and mapping. This should include the stream reaches, like I mentioned previously, which doesn't have H&H. Also, any areas that, for example, may have 1970s FEMA flood maps, paper maps, so that needs to be updated. So that's the first task, identifying a specific flood risk. The next task is existing condition flood risk analysis, which is a three-step process. It's a flood hazard analysis, flood exposure analysis, and vulnerability analysis. The flood hazard analysis is determination of the location, magnitude, and frequency of flooding, which is the where it is going to be, how large it might be, and how often it might happen. Once we know that, the next step would be to do exposure analysis. This should identify every single building footprint, commercial and residential, every low water crossing, critical infrastructure such as water treatment plants or wastewater treatment plant, should identify each one of those entities that are at risk of flooding, that are located within that identified flood risk area that was identified in flood hazard analysis. And the last step is vulnerability analysis, which should identify a few things. One is identification of critical facilities. This should identify every single, we hope there is none, but it should identify every single police station, fire station, schools, hospitals, or treatment plants, anything like that, critical facilities that are at flood risk. We hope there is none, but if there is one, the flood plan should identify those locations. And then the other piece of vulnerability analysis is resilience. That's the ability of a community to bounce back after a disaster occurs. So every entity that was identified within flood hazard zone during the flood exposure analysis, it should have a vulnerability index identified for that. Next slide, please. So the first bullet point here is set flood risk management goals. You'll hear us mention multiple times that the regional flood planning groups are self-governing. The planning groups set their own flood risk management goal. However, in our guidance document, we do identify some best management practices. This would include things like, would you want people to be building in your 1% annual chance flood risk? What kind of freeboard would you want? Do you want people to be built in their 0.2% annual chance flood risk areas? So those are the kind of decision. We will include some best management practices, but each planning group set their own goals. The next 3 bullet points identify and recommend flood management evaluations, flood management strategies, and flood mitigation projects. The FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs, this will probably comprise the bulk of this flood plan. The first one is pretty straightforward. It is identification of areas that needs further flood risk evaluations, that needs H&H modeling or mapping or some other kind of updating. So it's identification of those areas that requires further analysis and for flood risk communication. It should also include areas that doesn't have anything, any analysis at this point. The FMSs, the flood management strategies, they're long-term solution ideas that still needs to be formulated. They may be regulatory enhancements, or they may or may not include construction. It's to allow the regional flood planning groups to put in ideas in there for long-term solutions. The next one, identification and recommendation of flood mitigation projects or flood risk reduction projects. They should include all structural and non-structural projects in your region that could reduce the risk of flooding, that have been identified to reduce the risk of flooding. There needs to be permittable, constructible, and implementable. Permittable and constructible is pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. The last one, implementable, includes the other pieces, the soft pieces, like is a project. Engineers, we can come up with a perfect project to solve a flood risk reduction problem, but is it acceptable to the community? Is the community willing to embrace that project? So that implementable piece should look into that. And then lastly, this flood plan should focus on both reducing the existing flood risk to life and property, but also look at floodplain management in general to avoid increasing flood risk in the future by keeping future population out of harm's way. It's equally important for us to make sure now, do the planning now so that more flood risk is not created. We're not putting more structures or humans in harm's way. So those are the 2 key main focuses of the regional flood plan. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to James.
Thank you, Rainey. Next slide, please. And as mentioned throughout this presentation, the Texas Water Development Board is here to provide technical and financial support to the regional flood planning groups. In these initial meetings, we will help convene and facilitate the first regional flood planning group meetings. Also throughout, we will serve as a non-voting member at meetings and act as a resource for the group. The Water Development Board will also provide appropriations through regional flood planning grant contracts. We will provide guidance documents for developing the regional flood plans, help organize regular conference calls with the chairs, support the planning group sponsor political subdivisions, and also provide training and other general support as it relates to the regional flood planning process. Next slide, please. Some general responsibilities for the regional flood planning groups include following the flood planning statute and rules, and also being in compliance with the Texas Open Meetings Act at all times. Adopt and follow bylaws that govern how each regional flood planning group conducts its business. the responsibility to designate additional representatives if necessary to ensure adequate representation from interests in the region, designate a political subdivision to act on your behalf, to hold public meetings in accordance with notice requirements and in a transparent manner. The group is also responsible for selecting and directing technical consultants, and also maintaining a website for making notices, materials, and other information available to the public. Next slide, please. Some flood planning process basics. Just want to point out that and emphasize that the regional flood planning groups yourselves will make most of the decisions here, or essentially all of the decisions. We want to remind y'all that this is a collaborative process across the basin. You are all representing specific interest groups, but we want to emphasize that you're not just representing, your company or your specific area, but rather your entire interest group for the entire flood planning region. So just to keep that in mind when making decisions and discussing items. Also note that this is intended to be a transparent and public process to develop the regional flood plans, and that the 15 regional flood plans will eventually roll up into a comprehensive statewide flood plan. I want to note that this is intended to be a 5-year recurring planning cycle, although this first planning cycle is somewhat shorter than that. The statutory deadline for the first regional flood plans is January 10th, 2023. So that gives a little over 2 years to get that first plan put together. Here we can see an overall timeline. Right now we're in the October-November 2020 range, having these first meetings. The next steps outlined, as you can see on the timeline in here, include contract execution with regional flood planning group sponsors, the soliciting and procurement of technical consultants, as well as a technical memorandum and draft plans due in 2022. Also want to note the 2 red dots on the right. These dates are set by statute, and those include, as I mentioned earlier, the January 10th, 2023 due date, as well as the September 1st, 2024 due date for the first state flood plan, which is due to the legislature at that time. That concludes our presentation for this agenda item. Also want to take this time to go back to Mr. Marty Kelly, who I believe has worked out his microphone. Mr. Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself? All right, looks like we still can't hear you. Next on the agenda is item number 5, a discussion of group bylaws and consider adopting group bylaws. And our plan for this item is the Water Development Board has put together a set of model bylaws that we can discuss for the group here. We will put those on the screen in a minute, and we can go down through those, discuss a few items that we want to call your attention to. We'll take input from the members, any suggested changes or revisions, and once the group goes through any suggested changes or revisions, at that time we can take a vote to see whether or not the group wants to adopt those bylaws. Included here are some basic bylaw requirements that are included in the rule. I won't read all of these and go through all of these specifically, but just note that several items that are included in the bylaws do come directly from the rule, and we've taken the task of highlighting those in gray in the model bylaws for your reference. Next slide, please. Thank you. As I mentioned, there are several requirements for different types of votes and to accomplish different actions that are either mentioned in the bylaws or come directly from rule. And what we have here is a helpful table to kind of show the different types of votes, whether that be 2/3 of all existing voting positions, 2/3 of all voting members present, a majority of voting positions, or majority of members present. Those are the 4 types of votes. And as you can see, most of them fall under majority of voting members present. However, I do want to call attention to both the bylaws, which takes a 2/3 vote of all voting members present, and the one item that takes 2/3 of all existing voting positions, which is to add voting positions that increase the total number of voting positions. And with that, if there's no objections, we can go to the model bylaws and begin a discussion on that. All right. Hearing none.
I do have a question. Can we ask a question now?
Yes, ma'am.
And I may have missed it because I went through these. This is Suzanne Scott, by the way. I'm sorry. I didn't see a way to amend the bylaws. There's a section that says adoption and amendment, but then it doesn't talk about how to amend the bylaws, because it's under Article, I guess that's 15.
Yes, ma'am.
There's a section that says adoption and amendment, but I didn't see anything about amending them.
Yes, ma'am, and that is very sharp to notice. We have noticed that as well, and thank you. And that is one of our suggested revisions that we were going to go through in here today. But yes, that is a good point. If you don't mind, we can start out with that one and just go ahead and address that point, if that's fine with everyone.
Because I would think that, because I know we're being asked to adopt these pretty quickly, and if we do, and then we come back later and want to amend them, it would be nice to know what the process is for doing that, so that we would know what kind of flexibility we have given if we adopt these model bylaws.
Yes, ma'am. And Morgan, it's down in Article 15.
Page 15.
Give me just a second, James. Sorry.
Sure, not a problem.
All right, can you see it now?
Yes, Morgan, thank you. And so, Ms. Scott, the language you're referring to here is this highlighted section in gray. The voting members shall adopt these bylaws by a 2/3 vote of the voting members present. What we have been suggesting, as you mentioned, is to add just the short phrase "and or amend," but that does require 2/3 votes to adopt and or amend the bylaws. Is that what you had in mind, or some sort of different vote for amending?
No, that would be fine. Sometimes there's requirements for notice if you're going to amend bylaws or that sort of thing, but you're saying that if we're going to, if we wanted to come in and amend the bylaws, it would simply just be put on an agenda with the appropriate open meetings requirements, and then we could adopt it at the next meeting. There wouldn't be any more requirement than a normal posting requirement for any changes to the bylaws. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. There's nothing in the rule specifically related to notice requirements for the bylaws. It would just fall under the general 7-day notice, in my understanding. And also my understanding, there's nothing currently in the bylaws that increases that notice for changing or for amending the bylaws. So yes, it would fall. It seems to fall under that 7-day notice as you described.
Okay, that would be fine. Thank you. It does provide more flexibility for the group if we wanted to change it as we get to operating and see that there would be something that would make sense to change.
Yes, ma'am. It's good to note that as written now, the bylaws may be taken back up and amended at any time, such as the group chooses. Is there any objection to amending this section or revising this section to include and or amend?
No.
All right.
No.
And what we'll do as we come through these revisions, I'll help facilitate the discussion, and I'll be looking to you all for suggesting revisions. And we won't take a vote on any specific revisions, but I'll look for a consensus or any objections to make sure there are no objections before moving on after any revision. But at the end of all revisions, we will take a vote on the bylaws, revised bylaws as a whole. All right, Morgan, if you wouldn't mind going to the very top of the table of contents. Thank you. And as laid out here in the table of contents, the bylaws do cover several important sections. Also including the name of the group, the floodplain region, responsibilities, voting membership, non-voting membership, the designation of alternates. There's an article on officers. Scroll down further, please. As well as articles on meetings, making decisions, records, committees, and compensation. Reimbursement is also an important section, as well as adopting and resolving resolution of the bylaws. And with that, we can go to the first highlighted section, first yellow highlight. Yes, please. Thank you, Morgan. As you'll note, the term model appears throughout this document. That is simply a placeholder for the group's name. And so if there's no objection, we can replace the term model throughout with the word San Antonio. Is there any objection to that?
None.
No objection.
No.
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 No objection.
Thank you, everyone. And Morgan, if you can please scroll down. Thank you. And so the next yellow highlight I want to call everyone's attention to is the last sentence of Article 5, Section 1 here, which states that the voting membership of the Regional Flood Planning Group shall not exceed 18 members. Currently, there are 12 positions as set by rule and as set up by the Water Development Board for this initial makeup. This doesn't mean that the group has to go to 18 members. However, just within the bylaws, it sets a cap on the number of members that can be added to the group. I'm sorry, voting members that can be added to the group.
This is Dave Wegman. While I think 18 is going to be a little excessive, and I don't think anybody wants to have a group that unmanageable of a size, I don't have a problem with leaving it there, and it can be amended down the road if we think it's getting out of hand.
And I just want to remind you all that it does require a 2/3 vote of all positions, not just those present, but all positions to add a voting position to the group. All right. This next yellow highlight says that the terms of the initial voting members shall expire on July 10th, 2023. And what this date is 6 months after the due date of the first regional flood plan. So we just want to give you all an extra 6 months to help work out any issues with the plan, to make sure that you weren't having to worry about selecting new officers while wrapping up the regional flood plan. Is there any objection to this date?
No. No objection.
No.
No objection.
No objection.
Thank you. And also in the same paragraph, it talks about the expiration of the initial terms. All voting members shall draw lots to determine their next term limit or term duration. Those will either be 5 or 2 years to help stagger the terms. At that point, following those initial 2 or 5 year terms, all terms will be 5 years. So that's just a one-time thing to help stagger half of the voting positions to help out with continuity of the group between flood planning cycles, so that all member positions don't come up for replacement all at once. If there's no objection, we'll move to the next highlight here.
Just can I ask why 5 and not 4 for that initial, so that you ended up on some even 2-year stagger going forward?
I believe it's because our initial, the planning cycle is based on a 5-year cycle. I think it was just to initially to get roughly half of the group off of that cycle, so it's an alternating cycle, offset by 2 years.
Okay.
Any further questions or discussion on this point? All right. The next paragraph states that there are no limits to the number of terms a member may serve. I just want to note that at the end of each member's term, that member shall still come up and need to be affirmed for a subsequent term by the voting members. So it's not just an automatic renewal. They still have, that member still has to be affirmed by the group to continue on for the next term. All right. Seems like there's no objection to this line. Morgan, if you would go to the next yellow highlight. In Article 8, Section 2, here there's a requirement that within 30 days after the adoption of these bylaws, the voting members shall select initial officers. I want to say that the election of a chair or interim chair is on today's agenda. However, this essentially stipulates that within the next 30 days, if the bylaws are adopted today, the group would have to select the remaining officers. I will note that some groups have modified this time to give them some additional time to go through that, maybe to get to know each other and better figure out who would be best fit for those officer roles. But this is not a required change, just a section we want to bring to y'all's attention.
I think we can do it 30 days, but I don't know about the rest of the group.
I'd agree. I think a lot of us already know each other, and the lucky ones who didn't already know the bulk of us, in 30 days will figure it out, right? Suzanne's laughing at that, but I think 30 days should work. I think.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Hey, right? I mean, we can do it today.
We can only do chairs today, right? Because that's all that's posted.
Yes, ma'am. Only the selection of the chair was posted on today's agenda, so that's the only position that can be addressed today. The other two positions, other officers would have to be addressed at the next meeting. I do want to point out that will require y'all to have y'all's next meeting within 30 days to help accomplish this.
I think it's possible for us to be able to do it within 30 days.
I'd rather see it done sooner versus later.
All right. Sounds like there's no objection to, or no suggested revision to this line. All right. Thank you, everyone. We can go to the next yellow highlight, please.
I believe that's the last one.
Okay. Thank you,
James,
Morgan.
this is Suzanne. I just wanted to ask you a quick question about
Yes,
the role of the secretary. You mentioned that the secretary actually is responsible for the minutes, but yet you also say that the political subdivision is responsible for the minutes and sort of those administrative tasks. I was just wanting some clarification on that. I just know on other groups that we, like the regional water planning group, we have a secretary, but technically that secretary is really not responsible for the minutes or drafting those minutes.
Yes, ma'am, and we can clarify that here in the bylaws if y'all would like. We understand that in many cases the secretary does not actually perform that role. As you mentioned, it's either someone on staff or maybe someone from the planning group that may fulfill that actual role of putting the minutes together. Our understanding of this language here essentially states that, that, well, it says secretary shall maintain, but if y'all would like, we could clarify this language however y'all would like to.
Maybe something like shall maintain or direct the administrative agency to prepare the minutes.
How about oversee the development of those minutes?
Yeah. I think, yeah, some language that would suggest, I mean, again, because everyone that's on this group has a full-time job, and I think no one would want to be secretary if they physically knew that they had to draft minutes and make sure that they got done if there's a staff member that could do that. So either, yeah, oversee the development or ensure that the minutes are prepared on a timely basis, something like that. Because the agendas and the minutes and any of the website materials and all that would be performed by the political division.
Do we need to add verbiage on the section for the sponsor to clarify that? The sponsor organization?
We could. And before jumping to that, do y'all see the language, the revised suggested language that's been included here for secretary? And I just want to see if there's any
The only thing is maybe take out the word take attendance so that you're overseeing the development of the minutes and attendance of the meetings.
And again,
boy, this is a lucky one too. I shall perform other duties.
Yeah. Maybe you, yeah,
I think it's
because the secretary shall ensure that all notices are properly posted as provided in the bylaws and required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Again, obviously that is not that individual because those are posted. So just
right. I think our intention here was to understand that, it may be, the planning group sponsor or other staff that are actually doing those, posting those notices and taking the minutes. However, that the secretary would be responsible for making sure that they're actually done and completed. So as y'all listed here, kind of overseeing that role.
Mm-hmm. So could we use then the same word, if we're using the word oversee as suggesting that they are kind of guiding it, maybe you need to use that common language where it says shall ensure. Maybe you could say shall oversee, again, using that there's not any misunderstanding of the difference between oversee and ensure in the use here. Just a suggestion.
Okay. So we've made that change here. Any other suggestions for this section? All right, if there's no objection, we can move on to the planning group sponsor section to verify that there's no required language changes there as suggested by Mr. Garza.
Can you confirm a specific section? There's this section about the principal administrative office. Was there a different section that someone was referring to?
Actually, no, I think you're right. I don't think there is a specific section of the bylaws dealing with the planning group sponsor.
Yeah, I think that was listed on the duties of the planning group sponsor that you had on one of the slides that we saw during the presentation.
Yes, ma'am. I'm just not, yeah, I just don't think there's an actual reference in the bylaws here.
Yeah. The secretary shall. So again, we can use the same word here. The secretary shall oversee. Same at the under A as well.
Any objections to those revisions?
No objection.
No objection.
Are there any other sections of the minutes that y'all would like to look at, or?
Well, I have a question about if there isn't anything in here, should we add a section on the duties of the sponsor agency that so as to clarify their roles and responsibilities?
Is there a specific section you would like to include that in? Looks like Article 3 deals with the principal administrative office.
Maybe, Neffy, what we could do is add a section that says that the planning group is responsible for selecting a whatever we're calling it here, a sponsor agency, and ensuring that the roles and responsibilities are carried out in accordance with the rules of the Water Development Board, or some generic statement, because I think that most of the roles and responsibility of that sponsor agency are going to be dictated through the Water Development Board, either through contract or through rule or through some other mechanism that they're doing sort of as a supporting guidance to the group. But we could state that it's our responsibility to ensure that that the roles and responsibilities are carried out.
I do agree with that. I just don't want to leave this document without clearly identify who is responsible for the documentation, such as minutes and any kind of a decision. If we're overseeing everybody, but we don't have that clear definition on who's responsible, I'd like to see that added somewhere in this document.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, just remember the challenge is anything we put in here, we want, like to Suzanne's point, to have some level of generic and wiggle room, because this amending the bylaws requires a 2/3 vote of all voting members. It shouldn't be a document that we can just change the way you could a scope in a contract or something. And so don't want to get too specific in here of those roles, as this is going to be evolving over time.
I agree with a little bit of what everybody has said, realizing that most of what the sponsoring agency's responsibilities are, I think, already spelled out by rule and statute. I don't have an issue with adding something to this document, but nothing presses us to do that today, since we don't even vote to select those folks until the subsequent meeting anyhow. So we could always draft up some language to vote on at the next meeting, adding to that at the same time we select that group.
I agree with that, David.
I do think we're selecting that group today, though, correct? I mean, it's on the agenda.
Yes, that is on the agenda today.
Well,
The group would still be able to go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just hate to create new sections in the bylaws that haven't been well thought out and vetted by the group. like we're kind of doing that on the fly, and we'd end up having to amend it later anyhow.
So Nephi, would you be, if we tabled that for now and then added it later as we worked on the words to ensure that we get what you would want it to say?
I agree. I would accept that. Let's table that, and in the meantime, figure out a place where we could add that verbiage.
Okay, just because you want to, I guess, just table a potential revision for dealing with the planning group sponsor responsibilities. Okay.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Are there any other sections or articles of the bylaws that y'all would like to look at or discuss?
Not for me.
All right. If there's no other suggestion, yes,
James, there is a minor modification suggestion from staff. It's on page 8.
okay.
Section 2B.
Can you clarify the article and the section?
Article 8, section 2B.
Regular officers.
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you, Rain.
You just passed it, I think. Okay, well, I can go down.
Article 8. To B.
There we go.
Yes, thank you, Reem. And what Reem's referring to here is the section on regular officers. It states that regular officers shall be selected at the first meeting of each calendar year after the calendar year in which these bylaws were adopted. And the reason we're calling that out for y'all's attention is since it's already so late in the calendar year, it's November, and y'all are electing officers at this time, it may be efficient to modify this language so that y'all are not having to select officers again in 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And so our suggestion here is to just insert the words starting in 2022, comma, regular officers shall be.
I like it.
That looks good.
All right. Was there any other sections that anyone would like to discuss? All right, thank you, everyone. If not, then we can move forward, and I'll entertain a motion to adopt the bylaws if the group so chooses.
Do we have to do that by the resolution that's at the end of the minutes? Are we adopting it by the language of that resolution?
I believe so. Let me see. Yes. Are you asking if that's the language of that the motion has to be, or?
Yeah. In other words, adopted by resolution, or does it matter?
I don't believe it matters, but if you so choose it, we can go that route. I don't think it has to, though.
Okay. Well, then I'll make a motion that we accept or that we approve the bylaws as amended.
I second that.
Thank you. Suzanne Scott has moved that we accept the revised minutes and accept them. Mr. Garza seconded. Do I hear any debate on this item? Hearing none, we shall proceed with the vote. Since this requires a 2/3 majority, we will proceed with a roll call vote. Whenever I call your name, please state either aye in the affirmative or no if you oppose. So going down the list, Ms. Doris Cooksey. Please.
I'm okay with it.
Is that a yes vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. David Wegman.
Aye.
Deborah Reed.
Aye.
Neffy Garza.
Aye.
Kara Tackett.
Aye.
Jeffrey Carroll.
Aye.
John Beasley. Mr. John Beasley, is he still there? All right. Suzanne Scott.
Aye.
Steve Gonzalez.
Aye.
David Mock. Mr. Mock. Looks like we still have him. Mr. Mock, can you hear us?
Looks like his video's frozen, so they may be.
Yeah.
He's frozen. He's frozen in time.
All right. Let's see. Well, we do have 8 affirmative votes so far, which is the 2/3 enough to pass the motion. If Mr. Mock is unavailable, we'll mark him as a no vote for this one. Richard, can you confirm the vote tally?
Correct. Just confirming, John Beasley, did he reply in the affirmative or negative?
Mr. Beasley did not reply.
Okay, so then we'll just Mr. Beasley and Mr. Mock have abstained.
Okay. I believe that gives us, does that give us 8 or 9 affirmative votes?
8.
Okay, thank you. So with 8 votes, that does meet the 2/3 threshold, and the motion passes. The bylaws have been adopted. Thank you, everyone. Next slide, please. The next item on the agenda is to consider nominating and electing the Regional Flood Planning Group Chair or Interim Chair. This process, we will open up the floor for nominations in a moment after I go through an explanation of the process for us. And after that, there'll be discussion and consideration of those nominated. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I will shortly open up the floor for nominations from the voting members to serve as chair of the Regional Flood Planning Group. This could include self-nomination, and I want to note that a second is not required for nominations. Once I've received all nominations, I will confirm all the nominations in the order received. I will then invite everyone to speak, I guess all the nominees for the chair position to speak on their behalf. At that point, we'll go through a roll call vote in the order of nominations received, unless there's only one nominee, in which case there will be a consensus vote. Each voting member can cast an aye or may abstain. We do not need a no vote. If the first nominee receives a simple majority of votes from the voting members who are present, he or she will be elected chair. If not, we will move on to the next nominee. And the first nominee to receive a majority of affirmative votes from the voting members present will be elected chair. Our plan here is to open the floor of nominations for a permanent chair. If one cannot be elected, then we could proceed with electing an interim chair. Is there any objection to that process as I've laid out here?
None.
All right,
No.
sounds like no objection. And with that, I will open up the floor for nominations.
This is David Wegman. I would move to nominate Mr. Neffy Garza of the City of San Antonio for the chair position. He's got undeniable experience with flood control in the region. He's worked in the public sector, private sector, and the River Authority. I personally am comfortable with that.
This is John Beasley. I would second.
I third it.
No, sorry.
Thank you. I have Mr. David Wegman has nominated Mr. Neffy Garza for the position of chair. Are there any other nominations? Last call for nominations.
James, I'm working with Mr. Mock to get his audio working. Mr. Mock, can you raise your hand if you can hear us? Great. Can you let us know whether you have? Oh, there you go. I can hear you
back
now.
in now.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. Okay, I'm back. I don't have any problems. I mean, I've seen, you seem like that's a good choice. I mean, I've worked with Suzanne a lot. She's a good chair too. But either way.
I support Neffy, but thank you, David. I appreciate that.
Any other nominations before we close the floor for nominations? All right. Hearing none, the floor is now closed to nominations, and we shall proceed with the vote. The only nomination received was Mr. David Wegman nominating Mr. Neffy Garza. Mr. Garza, at this time, we'll offer you a moment to speak.
Certainly, I appreciate this, and I'm humbled by this opportunity to serve in this capacity. Flood control, flood management, stormwater has really been my passion my entire career. I've been lucky enough to work with many of you here on this call, and so really looking forward to figuring out a way to really bring everybody together and listen to the various points of view to create a plan that's comprehensive and then ultimately saves lives. So excited to be a part of that.
Thank you, sir. And with that, we'll proceed to a vote. Again, since only one member is nominated, we shall proceed with a consensus vote. Those in favor of Mr. Neffy Garza to be elected as the chair of the Regional Flood Planning Group, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Please state your name and no. Looks like a unanimous vote. Motion passes and Mr. Garza is elected to be the chair. Congratulations, Mr. Garza.
Thank you so much.
And at this time, since we're doing great on time, we can take a 5-minute break. If there's no objection to that. And at that point, Mr. Garza, you may assume the chair role if you would like. Otherwise, I can keep facilitating. It's up to you.
I prefer for you to keep facilitating if possible. Make it easy.
Okay.
Doing pretty good yourself.
A little new to
Keep
start.
the delegation there.
Well, with that, we can take a 5-minute break. I have 2:28. If we can come back at 2:33, we'll pick up right here. Well, agenda item number 7. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you in a moment. All right, let's give everyone one more minute here. Looks like we're still waiting on. Looks like almost everyone's back. I think we're just waiting on Suzanne, I believe.
Yeah, James, just for the record, I voted like 7 times yes for the bylaw changes and revisions. You just couldn't vote.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Well,
Look like
it was the internet of things decided I wasn't going to be allowed to call.
Yeah, it looks like your screen just froze at the worst time there.
Yeah.
This is Suzanne. Can you hear me? Because it's saying that we're having audio problems. Is that true?
We can hear you.
I hear everybody.
Okay. Well, it wouldn't let me use computer audio, and I can't use my webcam anymore. I don't know what happened. So.
Welcome to my world.
I mean, everything was fine until we went on break.
I don't see you anymore, Suzanne, but hear you okay.
Yeah, let me see if it's.
Yeah, sometimes the
I've been
cameras take too much bandwidth. It could be a local problem, or it could be just the WebEx itself. The cameras take a lot of bandwidth.
Telling me to rejoin. Can I get out and rejoin the webinar? Will it allow me to do that?
It should allow you to do that. And we'll wait an extra moment. We'll wait a moment here for you.
Okay, let me try it again.
Sure. There we go. We can see you now.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what happened. That's weird. Okay.
All right. Looks like everyone's back now, so we can proceed. Agenda item number 7. Agenda item number 7 is to consider selecting a planning group sponsor to act on behalf of the Regional Flood Planning Group. First part of this, we'll go ahead and address any public comments. Morgan, has anyone signed up for public comment for this agenda item?
James, no, we don't have anyone who's previously registered to provide comments, but anyone wishing to provide comments can click the raise your hand button on the GoToWebinar system, and we can unmute you to provide comments. And I'm not currently seeing any hands raised.
Okay. Well, looks like one just popped up.
We have a hand raised from Brian Mast. I've just unmuted you. You also have to unmute yourself on your end.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you. My name is Brian Mast, and I work with the San Antonio River Authority. We're one of the groups that put our name into the call for administering this process. Just want to say despite Suzanne's retirement, we still stick to that, and we'd love to play that role. We have extensive experience working with the Water Development Board. We do administer the Region L water planning group, so we know the contracting process. We have staff that are familiar with all of that, and we'd look forward to playing this role for this group, if so chosen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mass. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to comment on this agenda item?
I don't see any other hands raised.
Thank you, Morgan. Next slide, please. And so as I mentioned earlier, whenever there was a solicitation for nominations for the Regional Flood Planning Group membership, the Water Development Board also solicited for interest in those entities that are interested in serving as planning group sponsors for the regional flood planning groups. And for Region 12, the San Antonio region, we did receive two interests from CPS Energy and the other one from the San Antonio River Authority. I just want to remind the group that it is not limited to choosing a sponsor from this list, that the group may choose any political subdivision that meets the requirements that they choose.
I'd like to make a motion that we do the San Antonio River Authority as the political subdivision for the sponsor. They've got a lot of experience with this. They've got great facilities. Suzanne was with them for a long time, and she can attest to this too. Brian Massey just was on the call. He's right. They've got really squared away people working there that can navigate through it. I would think they are the obvious choice for that.
I'd second that. This is Kara.
Thank you, Kara. And yes, Mr. Mogg, just to clarify that, sorry, you broke up at the beginning there. That was a motion to select San Antonio River Authority. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And a second from Ms. Tackett?
Correct.
It has been moved and seconded to select the San Antonio River Authority as the planning group sponsor for the Region 12 San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group. I'll now open this item up for debate and discussion.
James, I wondered if you can spend a minute to talk about the roles and responsibilities of that sponsor. As I understand it, it's going to be to provide not only administrative support, but also be able to hire a consultant to provide support. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is correct. Not only will they be provide assistance with meeting spaces, minutes, and everything, public notices, things related to the meetings themselves. As you mentioned, they will also be responsible for soliciting and helping to procure the technical consultants that the group will use to put together the regional flood plans. I will note that the group, yourselves, will be responsible for selecting and will make all the final decisions on those technical consultants. But the planning group responsible will be responsible for going through the actual solicitation process, reviewing those submissions, and coming up with suggestions for the group to make a decision on. They also, one thing I want to note on that is that even although there are no specific board requirements for procurement related to solicitation or procurement of these technical consultants, the group is required, and the planning group sponsor is required to follow state and local procurement laws as it relates to the solicitation and procurement of professional services. But whatever that entity's normal procurement process is, within state law, their own local law. They would need to follow that. The other responsibility and main responsibility for the planning group sponsor is they will manage and facilitate the grant agreement between the Water Development Board and that entity. And that will be the funding, the grant funding that comes to the Regional Flood Planning Group. So the planning group sponsor will be in charge of facilitating that contract.
And Matthew, this is Suzanne, just to kind of give you, sorry.
Go
ahead, Suzanne.
I was just going to say, with our experience that we've had with the River Authority, I mean, with the regional water planning, it does take a significant time commitment on the part of the entity of the administrative entity here, and I do know that the River Authority staff is prepared to give the time and attention to this, and given the fact that this is an expedited process, it will take a lot more effort probably in this initial phase because it's new and it's fast. And I know that the River Authority staff is prepared for that and understands that the commitment could be significant.
Understood.
This is Doris. I put our name out as a sponsor more for facilities. Just, you know, I don't know if we need to discuss it in that much detail. I'm not going to be offended. I just put it out there as a, like I said, we could assist with facilities, not. But I do think the River Authority is the better choice.
Thanks, Doris. I just want to say the strength of the professionalism and competency of the San Antonio River Authority. I think it's dealt with everything in water knows is strong, and they will do a very good job. I deal with them a lot, and definitely will be a really good choice.
Mr. Mock, I agree with what you're saying. So I agree with San Antonio River Authority.
Good, thanks, Doris.
All right. Is there any further discussion or debate on this item? Sounds like our group's moving towards a consensus here. All right. With that, we'll proceed to a vote. Those in favor of selecting the San Antonio River Authority as the planning group sponsor for Region 12, San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, state your name and say no. Thank you. The ayes have it, and the motion passes by unanimous vote. The San Antonio River Authority has been selected as the planning group sponsor for the Region 12 San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group. Next slide, please. Agenda item 8 is to consider additional region-specific public notice requirements, if any, that might be necessary to ensure adequate public notice in the region. And with that, are there any members of the public that have signed up for public comment for this item? I believe we have none. And at this time, are there any members of the public present currently that would like to speak on this item? Please raise your hand.
Just, James, can I just ask a quick question? What are
Yes,
the current public notice requirements? Are they just the standard? And I'm sorry, I know we put them in the bylaws, but I just want to make sure. Do we have to? Is it similar to what we have to do with the regional water planning process as far as notice?
Yes, ma'am. For most, and next slide, please. There's sort of I think there's a general summary on here. Here we go. There are 3 types or flavors of notice requirements currently within the rules. Pretty much everything or most items fall under the 7-day notice requirements. That's going to be all regular meetings. Most of your general items that will come up for discussion. The 14 days applies to items such as setting of goals, and approving or voting on any of the flood management evaluations, flood management strategies, the flood mitigation projects. Any action involving those requires 14 days notice if those are going to be voted on at the meeting. 30 days applies to looks like related to public comments on the regional flood plan itself. So once that draft flood plan is put together and putting it out for public comments, that would require a 30-day notice. And so the majority, and these are laid out in the rules, chapter 361.21. And what this agenda item is referencing to is one of the legislative intents of Senate Bill 8 was to make sure that as the state was divided up into flood planning regions, that the regions themselves would be allowed to look at and consider any region specific, any additional more stringent notice requirements that y'all would like to have. That could include adding additional days notice. It could include additional methods of notice. Currently, for most items, only require a posting on the regional flood planning groups to be developed website. Currently, notices are placed. The notice for this meeting, and for example, was placed on the Texas Water Development Board website, but it must be placed on the group's website plus the Secretary of State's website. Those are the two minimum public notice requirements, and plus the days as mentioned and listed in the rules. And so this is really to, if the group would like to include any additional notice requirements, whether that be methods, days, or whatever y'all would like to include more specifically. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
All right. And again, to note, this can be taken up at a future date as well, but at this. Is there any suggestions or discussion on additional notice requirements?
I don't see any compelling need to modify the existing requirements.
Okay. Well, if there's no objection, we can move on to the next agenda item then. Agenda item 9 is to consider authorizing the Regional Flood Planning Group sponsor to apply for grant funds and enter into a contract with the Water Development Board on behalf of the Regional Flood Planning Group. And I'll open the floor up for discussion on this item.
I'd like to make a motion to allow for the River Authority to apply for the grant.
I would second that.
It has been moved and seconded to authorize the San Antonio River Authority to apply for grant funds and enter into a contract with the Texas Water Development Board on behalf of the San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group. This item is open for debate. Do I hear any discussion or debate? Hearing none, we shall proceed with the vote. Those in favor of authorizing the San Antonio River Authority to apply for grant funds and enter into a contract with the Texas Water Development Board on behalf of the San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, please state your name and say no. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. The San Antonio River Authority may apply for grant funds and enter into a contract with the Water Development Board on behalf of the Regional Flood Planning Group. Next item, please. Next slide. Item 10 is a discussion of necessary additional voting and non-voting positions that may be needed to ensure adequate representation from the interest in the region. And do we have any members of the public signed up to speak on this item? I'm showing no public comment cards received. Are there any members of the public currently in attendance that would like to speak on this item? Please raise your hand.
James, this is Suzanne again. I'm sorry I'm talking a lot here, but I would
that's
wonder
fine.
if the group would be open to adding one more county representative so that we could potentially get a downstream county represented on the committee.
You know, Suzanne, I was thinking about that, but how about the idea of filling in that agricultural position that's vacant? Many of those downstream and even some further upstream, I think, would benefit from having that agricultural piece added to there.
And I agree with that.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I was just concerned because there are floodplain managers downstream in Wilson, Karnes, and Goliad counties. Particularly Wilson, obviously, is much more active in Karnes. I just would, since we're limited to one county, and obviously Bexar County needed to be represented, and that was the right choice to be made. It's just sometimes the agricultural representation would not necessarily represent the downstream flood management or flood emergency responders or any of those folks downstream that are in the counties. So I was just offering that as a suggestion, because again, you could have an agricultural person that's not necessarily related to the flood management downstream.
And I agree with Suzanne, and I think the flood issues there may be different. You know, you're coming out of the hill country, and and the topography is a lot different than downstream. And of course, the floods obviously get much worse further downstream and probably more frequent. And ag is an important group to consider because they have their own issues, but they don't have as extensive a planning as another entity with a planning background, whether it's a city or a county.
Do we have anybody that's within our CS within this group? They could definitely speak to the flooding potential in an agricultural setting, i.e. erosion and other types of surface runoff. I used to work for NRCS.
I just wanted to clarify for the group here. This agenda item is for a discussion of any necessary additional voting and non-voting positions. In terms of the current vacancy in the agricultural interest category, we have there's a separate agenda item that we'll get to next, agenda item number 11, that deals with addressing that vacancy. So we can get to that one in a moment. But this is to focus on any additional voting and non-voting positions.
Suzanne proposed that the downstream county be a voting or a non-voting position.
Well, my recommendation would just be to add one more county representative particularly for a downstream county, because we have the upstream counties, I think, represented with Bandera and Bexar for sure. Just we don't have a downstream. We don't have really any downstream voting representation on this committee.
Suzanne, I agree with you. Do you see any problems for taking the number up to 11, 12?
I'm sorry, excuse me?
I agree with you, but do you see any problems? Because what are we at, 11 now? That would take us to 12, where we could be deadlocked on something. Do you think that would be an issue at all? Or can we just have the county people, a certified floodplain manager for one of the counties, I would think could represent agricultural, because agricultural is affected by floods. I don't know, but I agree with you. I think there needs to be county representation down.
So have this position be in place of the agricultural?
This is James here. I just want to note that the rules or statute and rules do require that all of the original positions be maintained with a member.
And Suzanne, I agree with you, but I don't see why, in light of the fact that the downstream communities are highly agricultural anyway, that the agricultural position can't be filled with somebody from one of the southern counties that has a heavy interest in the flooding aspects also and could fill both. Just a thought. I'm not opposed to bringing in somebody else either, but.
Well, I just, I didn't want to assume that a defined position that is for ag, and then we would be essentially telling now ag, well, we're not going to choose someone that's truly an ag representative. We're going to try to make that person be a twofer. I'm not sure that the ag community would appreciate that because they have their own constituency to represent in the agricultural field. So I just felt like when this all flushed out and when all the appointments were made, and then you kind of saw the balance between upstream and downstream, I just feel like there's a void of downstream. I mean, I don't have a vested interest in necessarily who is selected. I just feel like if we're trying to make sure that this flood plan represents the entire basin, it just seems that, I mean, of course, I, as the River Authority, will bring some of that to the table, granted, but just as I don't represent Dave Wegman from Bexar County, even though Bexar County is a county within the River Authority's district, I just thought it would be something for us to discuss, to have one of the downstream communities, counties represented. I wouldn't say a city because then it's too many, I would just say another county to be considered.
Well, likewise, I don't represent just Bexar County, but everybody in this watershed. So that being said, I think if you have something in mind, then I think it could be brought back to a future meeting for discussion and voting on. I don't know if it needs to be a voting member or not. We can have that discussion, but if you don't have anybody in mind, there's really nothing to vote on right now.
Well, we would have to go, I think the way this works is that then you have a vacancy, you would have if we agreed to have a downstream county representative, then we would open it up for nominations for those for the downstream counties. I'm not going to, they would have to bring someone forward. I don't think I don't think that the idea of this vote is to actually put a name on here. It's more a position that would then go through a process. That's the way I understood it.
Have you heard any dissension from the downstream folks about not having representation?
I know that there were downstream individuals that put their names in, and they obviously there's limited numbers of slots here that could be represented. And if one of those would have been selected, then I would have asked to add another county so that Bexar County could have been represented, because again, I think that either way, it would be important to have an upstream, the major metropolitan county be represented, and then have a downstream county represented, just so that we can make sure that we have the balance between upstream and downstream counties represented. But again, I'm just putting it out for the discussion of the group. It's obviously the group's decision. I just felt like I wanted to bring it up for conversation and discussion today.
I'd like to explore the idea of a voting member or somebody from downstream that could serve as helping advising and providing input. Is there any concern about that position having to be a voting member?
I don't have a strong opinion either way, Neffy. I just felt like it would be good to have someone that is a floodplain manager of some sort, or a emergency what do they call them? Emergency manager, I'm sorry, from a downstream community. I don't have a strong opinion of whether it needs to be voting or non-voting.
And I would say when you do regional planning, that becomes usually a topic of concern, is, the upper basin or the mid basin is represented well, but another, lower is not. or they don't get the same level of attention for their issues. So, you know, that's probably where Suzanne is thinking, or some of this thinking is coming from. If there's an interest from that group, water planning is regional. And I know we're looking at, we want to have balanced voting between whether it's a municipality or a utility, that sort of thing. But, you know, I don't think one extra voting member would make a difference. And I think it would be the right thing to do, I think.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on voting or non-voting?
I personally would rather see it be, you know, my thoughts, this is Kara Tackett, would be maybe adding them as a non-voting member that, you know, they're a resource and bring to the table. You know, there's a lot of interests that aren't represented, or, you know, like Dave said, he's here to represent counties, not just Bexar County. Neffy, we didn't elect you, Chair, to represent City of San Antonio. We did it looking more holistically. You know, I mean, in honesty, there's from the private side of this, you know, Steve's the small business and I'm the industry. We're 2 out of 12. You know, we can't possibly speak for every industry and organization. There's no doubts the downstream may have some different issues, but I think it's first important for us to even fill the vacancy of those 12 original spots that were identified as voting members. And I think we reserve the right, you know, through amendments to the bylaws to change those as we go forward. I would caution us day one from just adding and growing voting members before we can really get into this and get going. And so I'd support more as a non-voting member than a voting member personally.
I don't have any opposition to that. Again, I wanted to, you know, Doris has sat through a lot of these regional planning groups with me over the years, and representation and where people sit it has become an issue. And I just wanted to make sure that that we're taking that into consideration as we're thinking about this, that to have that balance between upstream and downstream. We found in other regional planning processes, it has become important. But again, it's this group's decision as to what y'all would like to do. Based on the experiences that we've had in other situations, it just kind of allows for the community to understand that this is, that we're trying to fill those areas where we don't necessarily have that representation. But again, if it's non-voting, that's fine too. I mean, it's just really having someone around the table.
I concur with Kara's stance on this one.
My only concern is if you're non-voting, and I know it's not the right thing, but sometimes you don't spend the level of effort you would if you're a voting member. I mean, in all reality, your company may not allow, or the entity you work for may not allow that level of commitment that we will have going forward in the next 1.5 years, 2 years. So, but again, you know, we can consider it later as well, but I think it's good that we've discussed it.
Yeah, I think our plan is going to eventually have room to bring in additional positions. There may be other interest groups that we may need to hear a little bit more about and from. I think from the start, let's move forward as we are now, and then figure out what other industries we bring in.
I concur with that.
Well, I appreciate the discussion, and we can bring it up as necessary. I appreciate the time to at least have the debate here today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Is there any further discussion on this item? If not, we can move on to agenda item number 11. Next up, we have consideration of initiating the Regional Flood Planning Group solicitation process for individuals to fill required voting member positions not designated by the Texas Water Development Board. And this will apply to the one agricultural interest position. And Morgan, do we have anyone signed up for public comment on this item? Don't believe so.
We do not have anyone previously registered to provide comment.
All right. If there are any members of the public who would wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand at this time. All right, I'm not seeing any raised hands. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, not next slide. Go back one, sorry. And so with no public comment, I'll open this item up for discussion. And if there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion as well.
So James, we just need to go out again as a regional planning group to fill that vacancy. Is that what we would do with this action?
This action is to, as mentioned in the bylaws, there is a solicitation process, a nomination process to fill these vacancies, and this item is to initiate that process and allow the San Antonio River Authority, whom y'all selected, to start that process of filling this vacancy.
Okay. I'll move forward with that.
Second.
Do I hear a second? Ms.
Kara Packett, I second that.
Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded to initiate the Regional Flood Planning Group solicitation process for individuals to fill the required voting member positions not designated by the Texas Water Development Board. This item is now open for debate. Is there any debate for this item? Hearing none, we shall proceed with the vote. Those in favor of initiating or of allowing the planning group sponsor to initiate the Regional Flood Planning Group solicitation process to fill required voting member positions, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? Sorry, those opposed, please state your name and say no. Hearing none, sounds like the ayes have it. Motion passes by unanimous vote. The San Antonio River Authority may initiate the solicitation process. Next item. Item 12 is a general public comment period. Again, I'll ask if there are any members of the public who wish to speak and address the group at this time. And I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I am being notified that we did receive several emailed questions into the meeting recently. And it looks like since those are rather extensive and the person is unable, we can just have those submitted to the group upon conclusion of this meeting. If that's fine with there's no objection to that. Just to confirm, no members of the public wishing to speak at this time. This is a final call. Please raise your hand. All right, hearing none, we shall proceed with the next item of business. Next slide, please.
James, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I think we're getting some notes from staff that if we could try to see if her name is Diamond Ayala. So I'll go ahead and see if she's able to provide her comments orally.
Okay.
Diamond,
Yes, I do see that. Go ahead, Morgan.
Diamond, I've unmuted you. Are you able to ask the questions you submitted, or would you like to? Diamond, can you hear us? Oh, no, we cannot hear you. She sent me a chat. James, would you like me to orally ask the questions that she submitted?
Sure, yes. Yes, please, Morgan.
Her first question was, who will be the regional sponsor?
Morgan, you can just, I guess, read through the questions. The group will be taking public comments, but I do not believe there's any requirement to answer this, to provide responses at this time.
Okay, I will read through the questions. Question 1, who will be the regional sponsor? Question 2, are there other critical board members that influence the selection of the consultant team? Question 3, are there any schedule considerations when they will be advertising? Question 4, how big of a contract opportunity will it be? Question 5, how will they advertise their engineering requirements? Question 6, will minority-owned businesses requirements be set? Question 7, are there unique problems of their region in terms of flood risk? And question 8, are there unique requirements to meet their need for flood mitigation solutions?
Thank you, Morgan, and thank you, Ms. Ayala, for those comments. If there are no further public comments, we'll move on to the next agenda item, item number 13, consideration of the date and agenda items for the next meeting. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, previous slide. There's not one for that one. So this time I'll open up the floor for discussion of the, for consideration of the next meeting date and discussion of any agenda items.
Nephew, I'll kind of leave this one up to you. Just everybody understand that next week is a holiday week with Veterans Day on the 11th. I don't think we, and then, so the week of the 16th to the 20th looks the best because the following week gets into
the holidays.
And then we need to get our positions filled within 30 days. So I would say that the week, pick a day on the 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20, and let's make that happen. And as far as agenda items, we can do it similar to what we do with BRWM, and the members of the group can email in suggested agenda placeholders for discussion during that meeting before that is posted. That being said, if you're going to have this meeting agenda posted 7 days prior to the meeting, I would probably keep it later in the week so people have time to get their agenda items in. That is all.
Yeah, I agree that we're coming up real tight on the holidays. I think the 16th works great. I'd be curious to hear from the group what day works better for you. I don't know if Monday afternoons work well for the group, or if there's another day that works better.
Monday afternoon works fine with me.
16th would work for me.
Works for me.
Yes, 16th looks good to me.
We just need to back into a deadline for agenda items so we can get that agenda posted then.
I think the River Authority could send out a call for agenda items. I'm assuming, or is the Water Development Board going to prepare the next agenda, James? Who would do that? The Water Development Board or the River Authority?
We will help help provide items, sort of a menu of items for y'all to discuss or potentially discuss the next meeting that y'all can choose to select. But we'll help out in any way that we can with that. One thing I wanted to point out is if y'all do decide to take up the item of additional voting members or voting member positions, that will require a 14-day notice. So I just want to make y'all aware of that.
Yeah, I think that didn't get much support, so.
Okay.
Why don't we set the date for the 16th? 16th for the afternoon of the 16th, beginning at 1 o'clock, unless somebody has an objection to that.
And Neffy, it would probably be good if we could. Are we going to be meeting monthly? Is that what the thought is, since we're on a tight time frame, or so? Because we may want to, since we are kind of getting close to the holidays, would we want to think about what we would do in December as well, or?
That's a good idea. You know, I'd like for us to meet monthly, if possible, simply because, you know, it's coming up pretty soon, and I'd like to lay out a good outline with some of the process we're gonna follow. And if we stick to kind of mid-month, we might be able to avoid some time off.
So like the 14th of December? So the 16th,
potentially the 14th. Yeah, that would put it a month later, give us some time. And if at that point on the 14th, if we need to add another position or if we need to make any other amendments, we have 30 days there to make any kind of other adjustments as needed. But so tentatively, let's look at November 16th and then potentially December 14th.
Okay, I'll just say on my behalf, if we're ending up as our regular monthly meeting on the second Monday of the month in the afternoon, I have a standing conflict every Monday afternoon of a corporate meeting. So
okay, how about?
What are Tuesdays looking like?
I got a conflict.
Or if we could, I know it's tough this time of year, but it's only the second Monday afternoon of the month that I cannot move that. Other Monday afternoons I can do.
I'm with Kara. I teach, and so right now I'm prepping for a class that I have tonight starts around 5 to 9:30. It's but throughout the fall I have it every year, and so yeah, Mondays are normally very hectic for me. So if we could do it, even Tuesday through Friday would be exceptionally better.
So could we go ahead and set November 16th right now, and then looking in December, maybe look at that week of the 14th?
Sure, I can adjust.
Okay.
So we're looking at the next meeting, November 16th at 1. And then the following month in December, we'll look in the week of the 14th, potentially sometime between Tuesday and Friday, because some members have conflict on the 14th.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll comment that Tuesdays are bad for me typically. Any of the other days, so Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays, but yeah, Tuesdays are typically a bad day here.
A lot of commissioners court days.
Wednesdays.
And Wednesdays are going to be, how about Friday the 18th? Does that work?
I hate Friday afternoon meetings.
Well, I mean,
Constantly.
but you've got city council on potentially Wednesdays. Days. If you have B sessions, then you've got commissioners court on Tuesdays. Sarah board meets on Wednesday afternoons, and some of those staff members would be involved with this, given the River Authority board meeting.
Well, we may not be able to have a standing date, and we may just have to play it by ear because we have 12 people, everybody working with different agencies with different agendas, and it's going to be hard to pick a standing date, I think.
Why don't we have Brian with the River Authority send out a Google poll and see what our
one of those surveys.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to handle it, because we're all got different agencies and companies. Just the River Authority's coordinate that kind of stuff. They know how to do it. Just have them send out a Google poll.
Specifically for December, yes, sir. Let's do that.
Well, Neffy, I would do it for December as well as just a standing meeting date going forward. So the sooner we can all block that out and, get it on our calendars, probably the better.
I agree. So we'll give that task to our sponsor, the River Authority, to create a little survey, online survey to identify good standing date for December and moving forward. And for the start, we'll do this monthly. What about agenda items? Does anybody have any agenda item that we need to definitely address other than those that are filling in the other officers and executive committee? Is there any other agenda items that we will need to pick up?
Nephew, maybe have a position to present for the agriculture position. Will the River Authority be able to present?
That would be too fast, 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, I doubt that.
Too fast.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Maybe for December. We may want to give an update on the status of, on some of the data. I know that was one of the first things that they said, kind of what the status of the data is for our basin, as far as maps, models, master plan, just kind of where we are. Would be important to know. I know we've got some of that at the San Antonio River Authority, but maybe the Water Development Board has got some of that information as well, and just kind of get a sense of how much more of that we're going to need in that first steps that mentioned at the very beginning of this, sort of the starting to identify what that flood risk is.
I think that's a good idea. What areas in our watershed do we have LIDAR coverage? What areas in the watershed do we have hydrology models, hydraulic models? What is the state of those models and maps? And then if there's any kind of GIS data that identifies critical infrastructure and any kind of dams, hospitals, schools, any of that type of information, I think kind of a state of where are we right now would be very helpful.
I agree.
This
Will
is
we be able to go ahead?
All right, this is Reem with TWDB. We have a data hub that we can show to you what has been gathered there. But some of the items that you referred to, Mr. Garza, that's kind of task item number 1 on your list, or one of your first tasks. Once the technical consultant is hired, we do have a data hub that we can have staff present to you.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful, especially the vintage, when was that particular model developed, or is there even a model available there? That would be very helpful for us to know.
And Neffy and others, at some point, is there some value, I think in my mind there is, of just an overview of what y'all been doing with the Bear Regional Watershed Management Group. You know, that's been, I think most people view that as a very successful collaboration that's been going on in Bear County. How you work, what you do, what data is available, you know, as a framework of just kind of understanding how that's been operating for a number of years already.
That's a good idea.
River Authority, from you, from Dave, you know, I think there's a number of you that could give us an overview of how that's been operating.
Yeah, we can do that.
It'd be nice if we can do it also from a historic perspective, how the group got developed, why, and then go into the discussion of where we're at today, what sources are available, because there is a lot of information that we have been able to collaborate, and I have a lot of information that's actually online and free for folks to be able to access. I think it would be beneficial for us to be able to highlight those and showcase some of that information that is available for anybody to download.
Are there any other groups in the region or the river basin that would have similar work groups? I'm not familiar with upper basin or lower basin.
Not that I'm aware of.
A lot of the work downstream, because we've done that, the San Antonio River Authority has done the downstream mapping and modeling, and we've got a downstream, a lower San Antonio River master plan that we've worked on, so we could add that information. So again, you get to get the holistic view of what's happening throughout the entire watershed from upstream to downstream.
That's good.
We could provide that information.
I think also the USGS with the projects they've done with us and a lot of their work throughout the basin would be a good resource that we should tap into. Doug Schlibling out of San Antonio would be a really good person for us to reach out to. Would be a big benefit for us.
I think it would also be critical for us as a watershed team to understand any information when it comes to any of our high hazard dams in our watershed, because there is a lot of structures. I know the San Antonio River there has a few of them. City, we have a few of them, and I know there's several throughout. But many of those do have to be registered with the state, with TCEQ. So having that data be brought together to talk about what kind of frequency has that structure been rated at, I think it would be important also, especially as we move forward with this plan, is having that understanding. So I guess that falls under the whole assessment of our infrastructure.
And Reem, would that fall under what, you know, a fair amount of what the consultant will be doing once they're selected and bringing that data forward?
Sorry, I missed part of the question, but the later part of the question is the technical component, the consultant, you'll have the opportunity to hire a technical consultant to develop those portions.
Well, and Neffy was asking really about, you know, dams, high hazard dams, where we've seen issues, you know, data from TCEQ. And so one of my questions is really, will that be a kind of expected part of the consultant scope? Or will some of the non-voting agencies that have oversight there really, should they be bringing forward that data to us as a group?
The consultant will be working with you all, including the non-voting member, to compile that data and bring those data together. As you probably know, TCEQ has some restriction on what they can or not share regarding the high hazard dam. So you'd be under the same obligation if they are to share that data with you, would be under the same obligation to keep that confidentiality for a portion of the data.
Okay, understood. Is there any other items that the team feels that we need to have, especially for the next meeting?
That's a lot.
Yeah.
one item that I wanted to make note of for y'all was that currently we're anticipating to take an item to our board on November 19th, so 3 days after y'all's next scheduled meeting, to request posting a request for applications for the grant agreement contracts. And so at that time, you'll be able to see the scope of work involved in the grant agreement contracts, and those should be posted a few days prior to our board meeting. So by the time y'all have y'all's meeting, that information should be publicly available. All right. Is there any further discussion on agenda item 13? All right, hearing none, we shall proceed. I wanted to go back to the public comment just for one moment and allow the members of the group here to respond to any of the public comments that we have received. I know we received several earlier, and I neglected to give y'all adequate time to respond, so I just wanted to pause for another moment to give a chance for anyone in the group to respond to any of the public comments. All right, hearing none, we shall proceed. Well, that's all the agenda items we had for today. If no one else has any further items, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move to adjourn.
I second that.
Second.
All right, thank you both. It has been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. Is there any objection? All right. Hearing none, it's unanimous. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Congratulations on selecting a chair and finding a sponsor and everything else. Great job, everyone.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Have a nice day. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.